will now move to the motion before the House this evening. This House would abandon the ideal of true love. And I now look to Freya van Dijk to open the case for the proposition.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's both an honour and a privilege to be given the chance to speak here this evening. From an early age, brought up by parents or guardians who care deeply for us, the importance of one day building a future with someone was emphasised, whether implicitly or explicitly. We are brought up with the ideal of the nuclear family, and in film, Disney's Cinderella finds, or rather is found by, her prince. More obviously, during the yearly celebration of love on Valentine's Day, I recall my classmates receiving beautiful Valentine's cards from their fathers in the hope that they wouldn't feel left out at having failed to find a partner at the humble age of 6. That the pursuit of not just romance, but true love and a life partner should be a priority for children before they learn to pack their own bags or cross the road is, I believe, highly questionable. Whilst the goal of achieving true love may once have served a variety of social and economic functions, in a time of segregated gender roles where women had to find a partner in order to lead the family home and gain any element of independence, I find it doubtful that subscribing blindly to such a confining ideal at the expense of other relationships and aspirations should be something which we continue to promote in our society. In this debate, I cannot and will not try to argue that love does not exist. On the contrary, to me, I believe that neurological and chemical evidence, coupled with the millennia of writings inspired by great passion and affection, would provide some evidence to the contrary, even if none of us could trust the evidence of our own senses. However, I will hope to show that the ambiguous ideal of whatever true love is holds little relevance to the globalised reality which we now live in. And chasing after this outdated goal is now in fact damaging with regards to our pursuit of happiness, independence and personal development. Firstly, I'll demonstrate how the very nature of ideals is that they are not intended to be taken literally, and that doing so, particularly considering the unquantifiable nature of the love which is true as opposed to the love which is not, can be damaging both to those who adhere to them and their relationships with those around them. Secondly, I will illustrate the logical improbability and narrow-mindedness demonstrated by the notion of finding one's one true love in a world of currently 7.7 billion. If anyone were to hold this ideal as a priority, we'd spend our whole life searching and still never find the individual with whom we are meant to spend it. Thirdly and finally, I will show how with an open mind, full of inspiration, ambition and, of course, love, relinquishing the drive to find a true love in fact opens the door to a more balanced and, importantly, equal relationship. However, before I'm able to expand upon these points, it falls to me with great pleasure to introduce the opposition for tonight's debate. Speaking first for the opposition stands my fellow member of Secretary's Committee, Alex Yandel, a second-year PPEist at St Hugh's. As the initial proposer of the idea that we debate this motion, I look forward to hearing how he's convinced himself to discard his doubts regarding the validity of our debated ideal and argue for its continued relevance. My only explanation for such a thing would have to be that some lucky student has recently stolen his heart. Unfortunately, probably along with his bicycle, which he hasn't seen for quite some weeks. As he never stops talking, I'm hoping he's able to restrain his chat long enough to allow our guests the chance to give their own well-regarded opinions this evening. Speaking second for the opposition, I'm delighted to welcome Richard Cowles to the stand. As the creator of Love Island, the reality drama which gripped the nation over the summer, he has left a trail of couples, exes and even fiancés in his wake. Despite the escapist nature of the show's setting, he argues the show functions as a window into modern dating. And whether this claim is true or not, it can't be denied that the pursuit of romance has enthralled a generation. With its resounding success, the show last year received 4 times as many applications as there were applications to Oxford, making Richard an excellently placed individual to argue for the continued relevance of true love to modern day groups. Speaking third for the opposition, it's also my great pleasure to introduce Charlie Lester. As a founder and CEO of the Dating Awards, Charlie has acted as a dating editor for The Guardian, as well as making appearances on The Dragon's Den and as a guest judge on The Apprentice, while personal approaches include the launch of dating masterclasses. So if, like her, you do subscribe to the validity of the ideals of true love, she's the person to help you get there. With all due respect to my opposition, I begin my debate regarding the problematic nature of ideals, and the ideal of true love in particular. Ideals are named as such because they are conceived of as perfection. People have ideal weights, ideal future homes or jobs. This causes problems in multiple ways. Firstly, the ideal is difficult to obtain. If it wasn't, it would cease to be so desirable. Therefore, in order to achieve this ideal, one must make sacrifices. These sacrifices are not always in line with the actual value of the ideal, but the value as it's perceived, meaning that holding an irrationally dear ideal of true love at the expense of all else can be economically and socially damaging, causing holders to abandon valuable jobs and friendships in pursuit of something that they've been since childhood told that they should achieve. Secondly, an ideal is by definition a polite fiction. Holding this ideal to be gospel truth is isolating to people who feel left out for not yet having found this elusive true love, whether they are my 6-year-old classmates or a middle-aged singleton. Furthermore, I believing it's possible to ever have a completely perfect true relationship is disheartening, not just to those without a partner, but to couples as well. Propagating the idea of true love, that which is pure, eternal, and unique, as reality, is dishonest, in that it ignores the problems that real-life couples face on a day-to-day basis. Unless you predeterministically maintain that once one has found true love, the remaining debris of both partners' lives falls miraculously into place, then it's irresponsible to portray a flawless state of bliss as the end result of a successful relationship. All romances, no matter how well suited, will suffer as a result of external conditions. For example, recent job loss is found to be one of the strongest predictors in determining the likelihood of divorce. So representing obtaining true love as a passage to an idealistic nirvana leaves couples disheartened and doubting themselves. Denying the fact that sometimes people who are very compatible can simply just not be together due to chance or circumstance would be ignorant. Yet the simplistic representation of true love from historic novels and the media portrays it as a big fix-all. Therefore, if we do choose to hold true love as an ideal which we live our lives by, we are either left disillusioned by the fact that we don't appear to be good enough to find it, or guilty that despite finding somebody that we do love deeply, our lives are not in fact perfect. Thirdly, this problem is exacerbated by the unquantifiable nature of love. How can we know when we've succeeded in finding the elusive true love? Will we be left forever wondering, unsure if our relationship quite makes the cut? Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. Cleopatra demands of her lover, "If it be love indeed, tell me how much." In reply, Antony chides her, "There's beggary in the love that can be reckoned." Yet by defining some loves as true, we implicitly generate the contrast of a love that is untrue, in some way impure, but we have pretty much no basis for making that definition. For example, the first great love story which comes to mind for many is that of Romeo and Juliet, a pair of teenagers who eventually kill themselves over the strength of their love. However, Shakespeare's more romantically experienced characters in Antony and Cleopatra, not saying they end any better, hesitate to declare the true nature of their attraction, aware that defining love as true or vice versa is an artificial distinction which means very little. A person may, over the course of their life, tell many people that they love them, and they may mean it every time equally, yet uniquely. The idea that only one of those loves may be true and should be categorized as such disregards people's individual emotions and beliefs at the expense of a subjective and ambiguous label, and is therefore utterly unproductive. Fourthly, the portrayal of this ideal of true love, particularly in the media, continues to be problematic, reinforcing gender stereotypes. In the fairy tales of previous centuries, women depicted as languishing in towers or trapped in palatial prisons, passively waiting for true love's first kiss, while men embark upon adventures to claim them. Apologies, I made a mistake. That's the premise behind Shrek. Albeit the princess opts for a less attractive and more honest suitor than the one intended for her. In children's literature, 2/3 of lead characters are male, and a quarter of books have no female characters. In the Times magazine's 100 best children's books of all time, only 53 even had female characters. Of those which had speaking female characters, the vast majority were about princesses, few of which are portrayed with any agenda apart from waiting for a prince to emerge on the scene and that ideal of true love. This ideal is therefore not something pressed upon both genders equally, but something expected that women will make more sacrifices for. It's not the 16th century anymore. Aspirations, careers, and global travel should be accessible to everyone, yet the way true love is conveyed to children little reflects the gender roles which are present in modern-day society. Even if one refuses to lower the value that they personally place upon the ideal of true love, they must accept that the way it's currently widely portrayed is extremely problematic, not to mention heteronormative. To begin my second point, I would like to illustrate how unrealistic the idea of true love is. Not with respect to emotion, which of course you will feel, but with respect to its definition as true. To indicate that love is pure and the best it could possibly be means that a person must have found the other individual with whom they connect with better than anybody else in the entire world. With a population of 7.7 billion, that's quite an achievement. I hope Amy Webb, the propositions expert on the mathematics of love, will forgive me an amateur summary of some of the odds on finding a match, which I'm sure will be greatly improved upon later in the debate. If we take the UK alone, for simplicity, around 23 million adults are single and looking for love. And around 39 of those would be the right gender and orientation for a heterosexual couple, with homosexual matches being statistically much less likely. Of those lucky, more easily matched 39%, around 40 of those would have a compatible personality. When you consider age preferences and the likelihood of actually being physically, in addition to mentally attracted to somebody, some statisticians have come up with the number of the likelihood of any person finding love emerging as 1 in 562. If we expand this to a global scale, taking into account language difficulties, the likelihood of being in the right place at the right time, or even being able to get a visa to your maybe true love's country thanks to growing regulations, thanks Trump, these odds look increasingly far-fetched. However, this brings me to my final and hopefully more uplifting point. It doesn't matter, because you don't need to worry about someone you like and who likes you back being your true love, a conflictless, eternally perfect fit for you. The fact is that as we move through life, we learn from ourselves and others, act on our own ambitions, and make mistakes. To prioritize one person out of the fear that they're the only person who can make you happy disregards the enormous value of the love of friends and family, which we are lucky enough to possess, whether we remember it or not. Not only that, but it denies that as people we change and grow. The perfect boyfriend at 16 may not make the perfect father at 30, or the perfect husband at 55 when you're bored of each other. Therefore, to the students of Oxford, I'd urge you, do not worry if you don't leave this university with, as the old adage goes, either a first, a blue, or a spouse. There is so much more to transfix ourselves with than these damagingly narrow ideals, and it's for this reason that I urge you to vote in favour of the proposition tonight. Thank you.
I now look to Alex Greenwald, St Hugh's College, to open the case for the opposition.
Mr. President, thank you very much. And it, of course, goes without saying how honoured I am to have been given the opportunity to speak in this debate. And I'm incredibly grateful to yourself, I'm incredibly grateful to our guests, but primarily I'm incredibly grateful to the members in the chamber tonight for giving me an audience to talk to. The motion before us this evening is one that can be explored through a wide variety of academic disciplines. We could consider the neuroscience of what love is in a materialist sense. We could, if you like, recognise the slight irony that we would be analysing chemistry with chemistry. We could consider psychological explanations of why we love the people we do and what qualities it is that makes them attractive to us. Finally, perhaps, we might consider the sociological and philosophical questions, whether we all love in the same way, whether love is something that actually has a sense of intrinsic value, or instead whether the relationships we hold with others are nothing more than an expression of the society in which we live. Now, as a PPE student, you'll probably expect me to stand here and talk a lot about a lot of different subject areas, each of which I don't really know anything about. But of course, that in itself would not be doing our motion any justice. For instead, I wish to speak of why true love is something that we can reform, of why it is something that we, of course, need to tweak and clarify and make sure that we understand, but it is something that has the genuine power to be one of the greatest prizes of our short existence on this planet. And of course, as Freya mentioned, I am not going to make any attempts to skirt over the fact that true love, in the way that perhaps we intuitively understand it, perhaps in the way we have been taught as children or in Disney films, is a perfect conception of what true love is. Instead, I want to argue why an amended true love, a true love that is fit for the 21st century, fit for modern consumption, is one that can be of benefit to the entire world. As an idea in our minds and as a predicate of our entire worldview, I wish to demonstrate to you tonight why abandoning the ideal of true love would be deeply damaging to humanity's progress, its well-being, and its future. Firstly, however, it falls upon me to introduce the proposition speakers for tonight's debate. You've already heard from Freya Dixon Van Dyke, a second-year human sciences student from St John's College. And as you will have discovered listening to her, Freya is a very eloquent public speaker. What you might not know, however, is that for all her talk about true love, Freya was in fact an avid reader of Stephenie Meyer's Twilight series. And I have it on good authority from one of Freya's close friends that, and I quote, she used to skip through the books to get to the kissing scenes. Now, if you find yourself talking to Freya at some point after this debate, you may well end up talking about the topic of her gap year. And all I will say is this: I'm not sure if there are any romantic tales within that one gap year, but to draw upon a very old meme, I'm sure it would still be a better love story than Twilight. So, secondly, you'll hear from Professor Amy Webb, a seasoned writer and speaker in the field of love and data. Amy has written award-winning books and currently lectures at New York University, but she is equally well known for her fascinating TED Talk entitled How I Hacked Online Dating, explaining her transition from a lack of dates and romantic interest, relatable, to her eventual success in finding a partner. Now, I must confess, Mr. President, that as I was researching Professor Webb in preparation for tonight's debate, I came across this TED Talk, and I thought that sounds interesting. I'm going to start watching it, only to realize it was a talk I was very familiar with already. Lastly, you will hear from Professor Simon Blackburn, who is a world-renowned emeritus professor of philosophy at The Other Place. Simon has spoken at events across the globe. He has written influential books and has been published in some of the most prestigious journals in his field. And whilst, of course, my knowledge of philosophy as a subject area is as nothing compared to his, we do perhaps have one more surprising activity in common. You see, in 2014, before starting an interview with Oxtew, the Oxford University student newspaper, Professor Blackburn remarked, "Could we do it over some wine? There is nothing like a drink after the adrenaline rush of giving a talk." Professor, I will see you for President's drinks in the Gladstone room later tonight. Mr. President, these are your speakers, and they are indeed most welcome. So, to move on to the crux of my argument itself, the first point that I wish to make this evening is that if we are to blindly follow the proposition's case and to abandon the ideal of true love altogether, we need to be crystal clear about exactly what it is that we are abandoning. And here we run into perhaps a slightly interesting notion, in that the proposition was more than happy to point out the problems with one interpretation of true love, but seemed to take this one interpretation as being static or unchanging or rigid. And this is something that I wish to challenge. You see, I think old-fashioned conceptions of true love, even of love in general, can, of course, run into problems when confronted with a modern, progressive society. I'm not here to defend a cliched, patriarchal, heteronormative, impossible illusion of love. And you see, the notion that true love is about a man marrying a woman, they buy a nice house, they go and live in the suburbs, the man works, the wife stays at home, they retire, they get a nice pension, they live in a home, they die. That is not what I am talking about here this evening. This is not at all valid with the lives that we lead today, and neither should it be. And we can progress. On a deeper level, there's this constant implicit assumption that true love has to be this one person, that once you meet your one true love, you'll be completely perfect for each other for the rest of time until the day you die. No. The person who is perfect for me today is by no means necessarily the same person who's going to be perfect for me in 50 years' time. The short 20 years that I have been on this planet has taught me that people change. Indeed, the short few terms I have been on Oxford Union Committee has taught me that people change. So I appreciate that so far I have spent a lot of time giving you broad, general arguments, and I haven't actually given you my own definition of true love. But I will, of course, get onto this now. So for me, we have to start from here, that true love is about recognition that nobody, absolutely nobody, is perfect. Perfect with somebody else or perfect by themselves. Nobody is perfect. It is about the idea that there is somebody who can improve us. And it doesn't have to be one person, but there has to be somebody existing on this planet Earth who can make us a better person, somebody who can make us happier. True love is about the idea that this can be reciprocated, that both parties can end up benefiting from each other whilst perceiving one of the greatest emotional feelings known to mankind. And again, critics will say, as the proposition already has, that our perception of love is perhaps nothing more than a selection of hormones drowning our brains, hormones that can be fabricated in a laboratory and fed to us down dark alleyways in brightly coloured little pills. But this is, I believe, quite frankly, besides the point. It is, a feeling of true love is a symptom of something else that is going on. It is a necessary but not sufficient condition. It is one part of a far greater human puzzle. It is Aristotle who says love is composed of a single soul inhabiting two bodies. And whilst maybe two as a numerical value could be questioned, the general point here is, I think, quite beautiful. Humans are quite clearly social animals by the way that we see and we think. And by ourselves, we can only understand a tiny fraction of what we could with somebody else. True love has this remarkable ability to open our eyes to the world in a way that nothing else can. To put this another way, we must build our conception of true love around our lives rather than building our lives around our conception of true love. Of course. We must be brave, bold, unafraid, radical in constructing a true love that is fit for the 21st century. But be in no doubt that voting with the proposition this evening does not allow you to do that. Voting with the proposition this evening is saying, that's it. We give up. We are abandoning it as an ideal because we do not want to try and fix and reform. We do not want to make our lives better. We simply want to pretend the problem doesn't exist, brush it under the carpet, and go on being miserable. So you may ask, what is the point of fixing this concept if there are problems with it already? And the point is this: walking away from one of the most powerful emotions known to man and the implicit norm that we ought to embrace it is, I believe, akin to abandoning a core tenet of the imperfect perfection of being human. Quite simply, abandoning one of the most fundamental things about being ourselves. A belief in true love is not just about how we view our potential partners, but about how we view our existence as human beings and the worldview that subsequently defines it. We have the power to shape not just our own happiness, but to shape the driving forces and inspiration between cultures and people the world over. So that said, whether you view yourself as the deepest and the deepest of romantics, or whether you view yourself as the most rational of economic agents, whether you think with your heart, whether you think with your head, whether you think with some other organ of your body, the ideal of true love has practical purposes that I think make it an irrefutable goal for every human being on this planet. If you walk through the nose door and vote with the opposition at the end of tonight's debate, let me be absolutely clear that you are not signing up to committing the rest of your days searching for a Disney princess-style happily ever after, nor are you committing yourself to scrolling through thousands upon thousands upon thousands of oxloves, desperately searching for the faintest whiff of your name. You are instead making a gesture, a strong, bold gesture that in a world teetering with misery, with pain, with suffering, with rampant nationalism, with climate change, with Brexit, with Donald Trump, there is something that we can hope for, that we can salvage, and that we can hold onto. Mr. President, if I may, I would like to finish with a quote tonight. Of all people, it is Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher, who says, "There is always some madness in love, but there is also always some reason in madness." In echoing these sentiments, honourable members, I would urge you to vote with the opposition this evening. Thank you very much.
I now look to Amy Webb to continue the case for the proposition.
So I'd like to give my thanks to the President, to the honorable members of this House for hosting us, and to the opposition for that delightfully naive and misguided argument in his youth about love. I would like for you all to take a moment, picture the scene. London, 1593. A man with dark hair and a goatee sitting at a desk with ink-stained fingers feels an ache deep in his belly. He says aloud, "How can you understand the emptiness that seeks a soulmate? Love knows nothing of rank or riverbank. Honorable members, can you picture this scene? Can you picture it? Do you know who I am describing? Shakespeare, right? Actually, no, that was Joseph Fiennes in that movie Shakespeare in Love. And that was him describing our obsession with this idea of true love, our interpretation of what it must have been like when Shakespeare himself was falling in love and writing all of those sonnets. But, honorable members of this House, I ask you, what if the original premise of true love was wrong? What if, in fact, true love is nothing more than a logical fallacy? Is it possible that Shakespeare led the future of all of humanity astray, and that we've just been witnessing the compounding effects of his wonderful storytelling for the past 5 centuries? True love is a formula that was introduced to us centuries ago. Dating applications and websites have accelerated the speed with which that formula works. But in reality, true love is merely an outdated relic of a bygone era. It's a myth that we have all willingly bought into, even if we don't recognize it as such. And for the sake of humanity's future, we must abandon this myth tonight. Now, your Shakespeare invented the rom-com with A Midsummer Night's Dream and Much Ado About Nothing, but it was my Hollywood that industrialized and monetized the promise of true love. And it's a formula that's fairly simple. It goes something like this. 2 characters meet, they part ways because of circumstance or some kind of misunderstanding or some kind of tragic entanglement. Then they confront a central challenge, once again, central to their relationship. Then they overcome that challenge, and then they reunite in some kind of lovely, happy ending. Our interpretation of true love, capital T, capital L, is rooted in that formula, which divides our humanity now into an average of 102 minutes. And that central challenge in movies happens at around minute 28. They overcome the challenge sometime around minute 87, and then true love prevails just around the time that the credits are rolling. Unless you're screenwriter Richard Curtis, and then the math looks a little different. His math is more complicated. There are 26 characters divided into 9 groups, living through 9 romantic entanglements. All of them have different problems to overcome, so for him it's more like 108 minutes until we get our happy ending. True love as a formula, it works on all of us. So My Big Fat Greek Wedding, What Women Want, Hitch, Pretty Woman, Something About Mary, The Proposal, Sex and the City, The Silver Linings Playbook, combined, they have amounted to $1.4 billion gross. It's a lucrative industry selling this idea of true love. Now, behavioral economists would describe our obsession with true love as anchoring bias. That's when we become over-reliant on the very first piece of information that we hear, and it influences our worldviews thereafter. So if you think about it, and you've heard this already from my colleague, we are inundated with true love stories from basically the time that we're born. As children, we hear Cinderella, we hear The Little Mermaid. As teens, we read As You Like It and Twelfth Night. As adults, we read The English Patient, we start seeing movies, and literally for the past 2 decades, anybody on planet Earth has had no escape from Celine Dion, Leo, and Kate, and their hearts going on and on and on and on. Without realizing it, the true love narrative has been with us since birth. It is literally inescapable. Our minds interpret the patterns that we see as true love because of that repetition and that familiarity. So isn't it possible that the compounding effect of anchoring bias creates a sort of selective perception, and it makes us think that true love is the norm rather than the result of a very, very successful centuries-old literary formula? And that takes us to the present day. So right now, technology promises to accelerate the idea of true love using an updated version of the formula. It's called an algorithm, a word that you're probably hearing more and more. Now, algorithms are nothing more than a set of instructions. You put data points in. On a website, for example, are you a cat person? Are you a dog person? Do you like pizza? What postal code do you live in? And you're supposed to get true love on the other side. Years ago, I was looking for a partner. I was living in Philadelphia at the time, and I wanted to calculate the probability of finding the true love that I had been promised by Shakespeare and by Richard Curtis, who I blame for everything. Using their definitions of true love, I started running the numbers. So math is a big part of this. You've already heard about numbers from my colleague, but I'm going to continue to show how the numbers tell us a different story. So I was living in Philadelphia. There were approximately 1.5 million people in the city at that point. I'm straight. I was looking for a man. It's about 50% of the population, or about 750,000 people. I was looking for somebody between the ages of 30 and 36, which at the time was 4% of the population. That meant I now have a pool of 30,000 potential daters that I could go with. I'm Jewish. I'm Jewish. So I'm not religious, but I was looking for somebody who was like gastronomically Jewish, like I am. So that's about 2.3% of the population. And that now takes the number down to 690. You figure I have to have some kind of chemistry with that other person, that intrinsic quality that connects us. And I'm assuming that's about 1 in 10. And I hate sports. So basically what this math amounts to is that there was only 35 people out of 1.5 million that I could date in the entire city of Philadelphia. And as an aside, I have really bad news for the members of this House. I ran the numbers for you as well. The numbers don't look good. If you're a 20-year-old lesbian who's interested in theology, you have a 0.001% chance of finding true love at Oxford. If you're a male graduate student who's really interested in engineering, why didn't you go to Cambridge? Is it possible, honorable members, that going forward we need to address our anchoring bias towards the literary and Hollywood idea of true love and instead create our own narratives? So I would ask the honorable members of this House to consider what I did. I threw away that true love formula, and I came up with not 7 basic narrative points, but instead 72 very, very specific data points that I would need in order to find somebody that I was looking for. And those points ranged all over the place. It wasn't cat person or dog person. I had very specific data points around finances. I was also looking for somebody who weighed 20 pounds more than me at all times, regardless of what I weighed. And I took those data points and reverse engineered the dating algorithms on the website. And it turns out my algorithm worked really, really well. In fact, I, after the end of all of this, found the one person using a different set of numbers that I thought I could spend the rest of my life with. And in fact, he's sitting right there. I'm happy that makes you happy, honorable members, and I will tell you why. I would ask you to consider, are we chasing the idea of love or an ideal of true love defined by somebody who lived 453 years ago? Now, we have to abandon this comfortable idea that we have, this comfortable formula of true love. Instead, we have to be willing to accept that true love has absolutely no place in our modern world as it's always been defined. And not only does it have no place, but true love never existed to begin with. I'm a pragmatist, and I'm a futurist. I use data to try to figure out what's coming next. So let me give you a very quick glimpse in the few remaining seconds that I have. In China, there's a bot called Xiaoice that has been interacting with humans, convincing humans that it, and she is gendered, is real. When the humans found out all throughout China that Xiaoice is a bot, they didn't care. They were happy to have that relationship. In the United States, we have a company called RealDoll. In the spring, it's going to be releasing a doll that has lifelike skin and is powered through AI. You'll be able to train and develop a personality and a companion that is a robot. And you can talk to your humanoid doll, and you can have an entire relationship with it. Within the next 20 years, we're going to see a convergence of certain technologies that will call into question our cherished beliefs about true love. And so isn't it possible that in the future, we won't fall in love, but rather program it? You have no choice but to vote for the proposition. True love never existed. And this should actually give us all hope, because it means that we don't have to fit ourselves into somebody else's formula. We get to write our own stories going forward, even if those stories involve robots.
And I now look to Charlie Lester to continue the case for the opposition.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's an absolute privilege to be invited to speak here today. Thank you to all the speakers who've gone before me. What a topic to be debating. I'm not sure if it's ironic that I'm single and arguing in favour of true love while members of the opposition are happily married. Let me begin by defining the indefinable. What is true love? We've all heard thousands of songs about it, read poems, watched films, but what exactly is it? Anyone who's ever been to a wedding will probably have heard a quote from Corinthians 13. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast. It is not proud, it is not rude, it is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrong. Personally, I don't think that sounds like something that we should be getting rid of, and I'm neither religious nor in love. True love has been called an ideal, something too perfect to truly exist. And it is suggested that people waste their lives searching for this idealistic notion. I work in the dating industry, and to some degree, I can see how online dating hasn't helped with this perception, because often sites require a person to define exactly what they're looking for. And while on a more serious site, what they may actually be looking for is love, what they type in is over 6 foot, brown hair, blue eyes, big paycheck. I regularly hear matchmakers telling stories of clients who have approached them with insanely long lists of requirements in a future partner, when really all that matters about the match is a mutual attraction which leads to mutual affection and commitment. I would like to argue against the representation of true love as an ideal. True love is a choice to commit to another person, a decision that someone is your one. It isn't a case of finding the one person out of 7.6 billion people destined to be with you. It's a matter of finding someone who you are happy and willing to commit to, and who will do the same for you. While I have not known true love myself, I have seen it firsthand in my parents. They were born in different countries and met in a rather fairy tale-like way. My mum grew up on a remote farm in rural Romania, and my dad was on the 1970s equivalent of a gap year. However, the true love part of their story was not the way they met. It was the realities and struggles that they endured together over 30 years of marriage. They both made a commitment and they stuck to it, in sickness and in health, tackling cancer, mental illness, unemployment, and much more together as a solid, unbreakable unit. It wasn't an ideal, it was a reality. And why anyone would want to give that up, or give up the choice of that reality, is beyond me. The opposition today may argue that society has changed a lot since my parents met, that hookup culture is increasingly prevalent and encouraged by dating apps like the ones which enter the dating wards. And yet this hookup culture is nothing new. It has existed for thousands of years behind relatively closed doors. It's simply the case that apps like Tinder and Grindr have brought the topic into everyday conversation. While dating apps make one-night stands simpler to orchestrate, 15 years ago when I was a fresher, at the other place, people were just as promiscuous. They simply met in clubs before bed hopping. And these instincts go far beyond living memory, as far back as ancient Greece and Rome. The House may move to abandon the ideal of true love because hookup culture suggests the notion is outdated, and yet true love and promiscuity have lived side by side throughout civilization, each serving a purpose to different people at different times in their lives. As I mentioned at the start, astonishing amounts of art, film, music, poetry and prose are inspired by love. It's a notion which brings out the very most creative side of humans. And while some may say that it's the ideal of love which encourages the arts and not the reality of it, I think you have to feel something to truly be inspired by it. To abandon true love is to abandon a notion which has inspired some of the most treasured works of mankind. Some may argue that hookup culture and the prevalent promiscuity show that we're simply animals, governed by our loins, and that love is just a carefully crafted mix of chemicals designed to ensure the continuity of the human race. And yet, if that were true, then why do some men fall in love with other men, and some women with other women? Why do some animals mate for life and remain coupled long after reproduction is a concern? Furthermore, isn't one of the things which distinguishes us from animals our capacity to create art and literature and music, things which the sentiment of true love has pervaded over time? True love not only invigorates our minds, it also fortifies our bodies. Studies in the American Journal of Medicine have shown that men who feel loved and supported by a spouse have a reduced risk of angina and less chance of contracting stomach ulcers. By contrast, tachycardiomyopathy is a condition by which someone can quite literally die from a broken heart. The emotional stress caused by rejection can cause a sudden weakening of the lining of the heart, which causes symptoms similar to a heart attack. The Harvard Study of Adult Development tracked the lives of 268 Harvard students for almost 80 years, with an aim of revealing clues to living a happy, healthy life. The decades of research revealed that feeling and expressing love is the single most important variable in remaining emotionally and physically healthy and living longer. Love between humans literally insulates the cells in our bodies from damage and destruction. The participants of the study who were in happy marriages also had better states of mental health and tangibly felt less emotional and physical pain. According to the study, loneliness has as negative an effect on health and life expectancy as smoking or alcoholism. Some say that true love is an unrealistic, idealistic notion. Some say it is steeped in dangerous expectations and an unrealistic bliss which will never be lived up to. And yet the health benefits of a stable romantic relationship have been proven. True love is not an ideal, it is a choice, and one which should not be removed from the table. Yes, there is, and always has been, a place for hookup culture and open relationships, but there is also a vital place in society for true love. This is something which the dating industry acknowledges and caters for, with different apps, sites and offerings available for every intention and predilection. At one end of the spectrum are Tinder and Grindr, at the other Match.com, Gaydar, Christian Connection, Her. True love is not an ideal. It is not a tick list or an unattainable destination. It is pragmatic and enduring. True love is not a feeling, it is an action. You decide who your true love is, and you make an active decision to commit to that person for better and for worse. You can choose to be all of those things in the Corinthians verse. As a single woman of an age where there is a social pressure on me to settle down, the operative word perhaps being unsettle, I can honestly say that true love is not a notion which I have abandoned, and I don't believe it is one that the House should either. Ladies and gentlemen, I urge you to vote no tonight.
Look to Simon Blackburn to close the case for the proposition.
Thank you very much. I feel very honored to come here, Mr. President. It's a great privilege to address this House. I feel very sad that I have to play a part in destroying so much youthful optimism. Now, I'm not denying the existence of all kinds of love, including the love that was so eloquently talked about by the opposition, the love of husband and wife, love that endures over time, love that takes decisions together and is basically cemented by a kind of commitment, a decision, not, as it were, by an infatuation or an obsession. So the romantic love that I'm going to warn you against is the kind of love that is fueled by infatuation and obsession, the kind of thing that might amount to love at first sight. It doesn't have to be at first sight, but it could be. Well, I condemn that. I think it's a catastrophe. I think that if you are victims of it, it's a calamity. And I call on writers and thinkers of all ages as witness to this. Well, we've all heard about love's capacity for deceit. In fact, there are three kinds of deceit which are endemic to the obsessions and infatuations of romantic love. There's deceit about the other. You're deceived about the other. I'll talk about that in a minute. There's deceit of the other. You lie to the other person. And finally, there's deceit about yourself. You don't know who you are, and you lie to yourself about who you are. So, to take the easy one, deceit of the other. Here's Dorothy Parker. By the time you swear you're his, shivering and sighing, and he swears his love for you is infinite, undying. Lady, take a note of this. One of you is lying. Deceit about the other. Well, Stendhal, who wrote a book on love, gives a lovely example. He says, in the salt mines of Salzburg, they throw a leafless wintry bough into one of the abandoned workings. 2 or 3 months later, they haul it out, covered with a shining deposit of crystals. The smallest twig, no bigger than a tomtit's claw, is studded with a galaxy of scintillating diamonds. The original branch is no longer recognizable. What I have called crystallization is a mental process which draws from everything that happens new proofs of the perfection of the loved one. Well, of course, loved ones aren't perfect. Proofs of their perfection are deceptions. So you might say, well, why do we go in for deception in the case of love? Why are we deceived? Why do we sometimes deceive others? Why does honesty somehow fly out of the window? Well, again, I looked at the philosophers. Schopenhauer, I think, is the first voice I can find who gave a diagnosis of this. This is some 40 years before Darwin, 150 years before Richard Dawkins. Schopenhauer said, "The high importance of the matter is not a question of individual weal or woe, as in all other matters, but of the existence and special constitution of the human race in times to come. Therefore, the will of the individual appears as an enhanced power as the will of the species." In other words, the onset of obsession and infatuation is, as it were, what Richard Dawkins would have called the power of the selfish gene working in you. It's there to enforce, as we've heard, a stable upbringing for a child. It's not there for you, it's not there for the partner, it's there for the future of the human race. And that's why, of course, you often feel, if you're hit by love, if you're in love, you're bewildered, you don't quite know why you are, you don't know who you are, you don't know why this one person is keeping you awake at night, and so on. And finally, you're deceived about yourself. Nietzsche said, we heard Nietzsche earlier on the other side, but he also said, people imagine that they are selfless in love because they appear to be seeking the advantage of another creature, often to their own disadvantage. But in return, they want to possess the other creature. Even God is no exception to this rule. He becomes terrible if he is not loved in return. And of course, you're all familiar with the terrible destruction of the self that goes alongside things like jealousy, fear of loss, recognition of infidelity on the part of another. Nietzsche also said, love is no more than a refined form of parasitism, and making one's nest in another's soul, and sometimes even in another's flesh, and how constantly at the cost to the host. So, if you fall in love and you're proud of it, be aware that you are entering into a nest of deceptions. You have become imprinted on somebody, just as a baby bird might become imprinted on its mother. And baby birds can become imprinted on inanimate objects if experimenters are unkind enough to put them in the nest. All the rest is crystallization, it's deception, it's self-deception, it's illusion. Well, you might say, but the game is worth it, and we've heard a certain amount of this from the other side. Well, is it? Hausmann, not a philosopher, but a poet, says, "When I was 21, I heard a wise man say, 'Give crowns and pounds and guineas, but not your heart away. Give pearls away and rubies, but keep your fancy free. But I was 21, no use to talk to me.' When I was 21, I heard him say again, 'The heart from out the bosom was never given in vain. 'Tis paid with sighs aplenty and sold for endless rue. And I am 22, and oh, 'tis true, 'tis true.' So I implore you, guard against it. Think of the risks. Think of Troilus and Cressida, dead. Ophelia and Hamlet, Ophelia dead, Hamlet dead later. Desdemona and Othello. Romeo and Juliet, dead. Mimi and Rodolfo, dead. Anna Karenina, dead. Tristan and Isolde, dead. Swan and Odette, Swan dead. Odette survives. The list goes on for Emma Bovary, dead as a doornail. Jealousy, desolation, abandonment, despair, wherever you look in literature, that's the result. You never listen, you never hear, except in fairy stories, you hear that they lived happily ever after. We don't know how long after they lived for. So beware, beware. I'm going to finish with Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard said, when two beings fall in love with each other and begin to suspect that they were made for each other, it is time to have the courage to break it off. For by going on, they have everything to lose and nothing to gain. And that's what's wrong with true love in the sense of the motion. Of course, you can decide to live with somebody. You can decide to rub along together. You can become nice. That's all good. Aristotle was in favor of friendship rather than eros. Eros was a kind of madness for the Greeks, and I'm telling you it's a kind of madness for you too. So beware, and do not think of it as an ideal. Commiserate with your friends if they fall victim to it. Take them out for a drink, and the best prophylactic was known to Lucretius and Epicurus, those eminently sensible classical philosophers, who said, if you feel love coming on, go and play the field. Go and find other people. Examine other beauties. That's what Benvolio tells Romeo to try and cure his tendency to infatuation. But above all, don't let yourself become a victim. Thank you.
And I now look to Richard Cowles to close the case for the opposition.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for asking me to join today's debate. I'm here to speak against the motion, this House would abandon the ideal of true love. And I fear I'm going to revert into my usual position, which is lowering the tone. So I apologise for that. But I'd like to begin with some quotes. For true love is inexhaustible. The more you give, the more you have. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, poet. True love is eternal, infinite, and always like itself. It is equal and pure, without violent demonstrations. It is seen with white hairs, and it's always young in the heart. Honoré de Balzac, novelist and playwright. He is literally 100% legit my type on paper. Amber Davis, winner of Love Island 2017. My point is that however we choose to express it, each and every one of us is hardwired to pursue true love. And that, to my mind, is not just a wonderful thing, it is also the basis of my proposal, which is this. Not only do I think the motion is wrong, I would strongly argue that the question itself, should we abandon the ideal of true love, is fundamentally moot. And that is what I plan to illustrate to you. Before I begin with my arguments, let me quickly address what is possibly this evening's most pressing question. Why the hell was a telly producer invited to speak? Trust me, it's a question I've been asking myself for several months. As Freya has said, it was down to my role as the creative director of the reality TV show Love Island. In case you haven't seen it, ITV2 describes Love Island as a show in which a group of young singles spend their summer searching for romance, while Piers Morgan describes Love Island as synonymous with everything that's wrong with society and life. We'll agree to disagree. Of course, Piers isn't alone in his opinion, and I suspect there are many out there who would hold the cast of Love Island up as the perfect illustration of the fact that today's young people have abandoned the pursuit of true love, presumably in the belief that they're driven by other goals, choosing the right career, achieving financial security, or finding the tightest possible pair of white elasticated jeans. I believe those people are wrong. To me, Love Island demonstrates the opposite, proving that even under the most testing circumstances, the pursuit of true love will prevail. Think about it. Our cast is thrown into a completely artificial environment, surrounded by 73 cameras filming 24/7, while a group of executive producers routinely throw in fresh potential partners whose only purpose is to break up existing relationships. Despite this, many of the couples that form in the villa stick together far beyond the end of the series. Why is this? I believe it's because at some point they experience that magical, indescribable sensation no amount of social engineering or editorial meddling can manufacture. The giddy joy we all feel at the first whisperings of true love. Now, the motion asks if true love is worth pursuing when it seems to be such an unattainable goal. I'm sorry, but isn't true love's apparent unattainability the whole point? The pursuit of true love is half the fun. The intensity, the passion, the sheer urgency of the chase. Life doesn't get any better, believe me. Yes, there'll be disappointments, finding out someone wasn't what they seemed, realising they'd been lying to your face, discovering they'd been snogging that scumbag Nigel Edwinson behind the bike sheds just because he had the keys to his dad's Ford Cortina, to give a purely hypothetical example. Disappointment is a fundamental part of life, but disappointment doesn't mean we should ever stop chasing the dream. That's why late-night supermarkets stock pot noodles. You know they taste absolutely terrible. You know after you eat one, you'll feel dirty and ashamed. But then you walk in the shop, see those little plastic tubs, and think, now that is exactly what I need. We can't stop believing, nor should we. My point was perfectly demonstrated in this year's Love Island. Camilla was your classic reality TV character. Young, attractive, trained in explosive ordnance disposal. You know the type. After arriving at the villa, Camilla fell for a boy called Johnny. Sadly, Johnny dumped Camilla, leaving her in bits. Then Craig arrived, and once again, Camilla thought she'd found the man of her dreams. Craig spent hours gazing into Camilla's eyes without blinking. It was a bit weird. In the end, Camilla realised he wasn't the one and was left broken-hearted. At that moment, Camilla felt like true love was never going to happen for her. But she was wrong, because as Camilla has learned, if you stick in there, sooner or later, a gorgeous Calvin Klein underwear model will appear out of nowhere and sweep you off your feet. I'm betting the exact same thing has happened to many of you. The motion argues that we should throw in the towel because true love seems unattainable. But the truth is that true love should feel unattainable. That's what makes it so special. It's precisely because true love seems out of reach that it has the power to hit us like a thunderbolt. If we all wandered around expecting true love to happen at any moment, A, we'd lose it would lose its allure, and B, we'd get nothing done. The motion also states it's unclear if being with one person for the rest of our lives is or ever has been suited to humankind. My feeling on this matter is whatever floats your boat. Humans are a diverse bunch. Many of us will experience true love with one person, but during their lifetime, others will find genuine true love with several individuals, which is good news for them and great news for all of you in tonight's audience planning to practice divorce law. But to return to the main thrust of my argument, while true love might feel unattainable, while it might seem impractical in a world of demanding career and familial aspirations, I believe there is absolutely no point arguing that we should stop pursuing it, any more than you would argue we should stop breathing. Why? Because we're preconditioned by thousands of years of evolution to seek out true love. We couldn't change it even if we wanted to. The fact is, as a species, certain things are hardwired into our brains. For examples, since the dawn of time, humans have believed in the existence of all-powerful beings that determine our fate. The Christian God, the Hindu deities, the research and development team at Apple. And just as that conviction is planted deep within us, so is the desire for true love. It's no coincidence that one of the earliest poems ever discovered is on the subject of true love. telling the author's first night with her new husband. It's a Sumerian work dating back to 2000 BC called The Love Song of Shu Sin. Here are a few lines from it. Bridegroom, dear to my heart, you have captivated me. Let me stand trembling before you. Bridegroom, I would be taken by you to the bedchamber. You can feel the author's giddy excitement and anticipation at the prospect of spending a first night with her true love. It's a beautiful piece, and I definitely prefer it to her little-known follow-up. Bridegroom, less dear to my heart. You made me sleep on the wet bit. What I'm saying is that the drive to pursue true love is by definition universal and irresistible. And that remains the case even when a person's wiring is a bit faulty. For example, in 2008, a woman actually married the Eiffel Tower. Erika La Tour Eiffel, that's her married name obviously, had already fallen in love with other objects, including Lance, a bow that helped her become a world-class archer, and the Berlin Wall. Erika even had a physical relationship with a piece of fence she kept in her bedroom. I'm guessing picket fence, it's so strong and reliable. Erika La Tour Eiffel is object sexual. And I think we can all agree something is a bit amiss with her choice of partners. Not least the fact that if Erika ever does go for an actual man, after the Eiffel Tower, she's in for a major disappointment. But whatever Erika's quirks, like the rest of us, she's hopelessly compelled for true love. As Amy mentioned, scientists and engineers have recognised this, and as I speak, millions are being spent developing what they're calling love bots. Robots that look like humans, behave like humans, even down to having full sexual relationship with their owner. Love bots are stunningly lifelike and have incredibly convincing emotional responses. Plus, I'm told, if you get the deluxe model, it also works as a PlayStation. Despite this, I doubt robots will ever quite manage to replicate the sensation two people feel as they fall in love. On the surface, today's technological advances have been a game changer. Before they came on the show, the cast of Love Island, all very attractive people, could easily have spent their time hooking up online with hundreds of strangers for empty, meaningless sex. But did they? Well, yes, they did. But despite all the opportunities for instant gratification, the one thing they still genuinely craved was that special someone. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to just move on slightly. I think the effect of true love on the arts would have a massive impact if we didn't believe in true love. Who would want to watch a film called When Harry Met Sally? They didn't hit it off straight away, so he chucked her phone number in the bin. And do you really want to hear Adele singing, "Hello, it's me. I was wondering if after all these years you'd like to meet to discuss a potential investment opportunity." So there you have it. I believe the House's motion is based on a fundamental impossibility. And even if that weren't the case, it would create a world that was duller, greyer, and a lot less fun to live in. So to the single people in today's audience, I would say, never give up on your pursuit of true love. And to Nigel Edwinson, who drove my first girlfriend off in his dad's Ford Cortina, I'd say, I'm now a television executive delivering a speech at the Oxford Union. So in your face, you melt.